Okay, so now for the exciting conclusion to the What Are Viruses trilogy. And we're going to cover the more interesting parts. So, how do viruses actually work? How do they make new copies of themselves? Because that's all they really want to do. Why does that make you sick? When they're making new copies of themselves, why does that make a person sick? How does your immune system, what does it do to keep you from getting sick? And how do vaccines actually help your immune system? Because if your immune system was fine all by itself, we wouldn't need them. And then at the end, I have a series of videos that I recommend you take a look at. Most, I think all, are under 10 minutes long, one or two, maybe even 4 or 5 minutes long. So they're short, but a lot of what's going on with viruses is happening in real time. There are actions and movement taking place, and so the videos do a better job of explaining than a PowerPoint can do. Still, it's worthwhile, hopefully, to watch the presentation and because it'll give you some of the facts so that you understand what's going on when you watch the video. So here we go. What are viruses? Part 3. Here we see a chromosome. And then down here we see an illustration of a virus. And what I want to point out here is that chromosomes are made of DNA, which is a nucleic acid, and probably more commonly referred to as your genes. This is a chromosome. And a virus has that in common with you. This is the DNA part of the virus, and then this is the rest of it. Remember, this is really, really, really small, but this is where the DNA is, and then this is like the body of the virus. So let's talk a little bit about this. Here's a chromosome. Remember, that's DNA, also known as nucleic acids, also known as your genes. And viruses are also made of DNA and RNA. And for our purposes, RNA and DNA are pretty similar, and they're both genetic material. And so that is, we can just call genes. A little bit of review. If people remember, have 46 chromosomes in our cells. So this is a chromosome, but there are hundreds of thousands of genes. So lots of genes in one chromosome. A gene would be one little part of a chromosome. Here's another gene. Here's another gene. Here's another gene. A little part of a chromosome is a gene. But what does that mean? Well, one thing that you should remember for a long time is that one gene equals one protein. Proteins are something that most people say, well, what's protein? Well, it's in steak. Yes, that's fine. It's in your muscles. That's fine. But for an organism, any living organism, or a person specifically, proteins are what you are made of. If you want to make a heart, a piece of a heart, it's made out of protein. Make a lung, it's made out of protein. Your eyes, made of protein. Ears, blood, everything, not everything, but many, many, many things, most things in your body, if you want to make something, you make it out of protein. So that's why genes are so important, because the genes are the instruction that tells you how to make that protein. If you want to know how to make a heart, piece of heart tissue, you need a gene to tell you how to do that, or else the tissue is going to be wrong. It's not going to do the job right. So the instructions to how to make the protein are in the gene. That's what genes are for. That's what chromosomes are for. That's what this guy inside the virus wants to do. This is the instructions on how to make everything it needs to make a new one of itself. So it's what you're made of. It's also what proteins are, or what viruses are made of. Proteins. And that's going to be really important in terms of understanding how the whole virus process works. So let's take a look at a virus getting into your cell. Here is the cell. If you've had some biology, hopefully you remember this word, organelles. Organelles are all the little things that do little jobs inside the cell. Remember, you've got trillions and trillions of cells in your body. These are really, really little, but even smaller than the cell are these little guys inside: the Golgi body, vacuoles, the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulum. Those are all organelles. And so a lot of people, I think most students, if you're like me, you remember these three easy to remember parts of the cell. The cell membrane is the outer coating that keeps what shouldn't go in from going in and keeps what shouldn't go out from going out, lets certain things in, lets certain things out. That's the cell membrane. If you've had biology, hopefully you remember the phospholipid bilayer and how that works. So that's sort of the skin of the cell. Then the nucleus, this is where the DNA is. Some people would refer to it as the brain of the cell or the command center of the cell. That's where your genes, your chromosomes are. That's what has the instructions about how to make a new cell, because you're going to have to keep on making cells to stay alive, and how it's the instructions how to do everything that we're supposed to be doing to stay alive. That's the nucleus, the control center, the brain. And the mitochondria, that's where you get your energy for the cell. Remember ATP, this guy is producing the energy that keeps the cell running. So these are easy to remember, but harder to remember are these guys. Endoplasmic reticulum, you see here, and Golgi bodies, you see here. And ribosomes are the bumps that you see on the endoplasmic reticulum, or these ones that are just floating out in the cytoplasm called free ribosomes. But they do a lot of different things, but one thing they have in common, endoplasmic reticulum, synthesis, folding, modification, and transport of proteins, Golgi bodies, etc., proteins, ribosomes, proteins. So these guys are all important in making proteins. And remember, that why is that important? Because you need to be able to make proteins if you want to make anything. And what is the virus going to do? It's going to take over all that stuff, and instead of making the proteins that the cell wanted to make, it's going to take these things over and hijack them, and then tell them, hey, don't make the proteins that you want to make new virus proteins, and therefore make new viruses. That's how it works. The virus gets into comes through the cell membrane, gets into the nucleus, takes over the DNA and these protein-making organelles, and by taking over the protein-making organelles, it makes new parts for viruses, makes new viruses, and that's how it works. Why does that make you sick? Well, we see an illustration over here of a cell with some viruses escaping. When these viruses escape, now they're out in your body, and they're a foreign body, which remember is called an antigen. So an antigen is something that your body recognizes as not supposed to be there, and your antibodies and your immune system is going to fight this. And just by fighting these viruses, that might make you get a fever. And them fighting these viruses might make you sneeze, or it might make you cough. It might make all the things we associate with being sick could come from just your immune system reacting to these foreign bodies. And another reason you might get sick is that, look at this, when these antigen or when these viruses escape from the cell kind of explodes, and that kills the cell. So when you're losing cells and cells are dying, that might also make you sick. So what about an immune system? How does that affect things? How does your immune system stop a virus? So basically, it's complicated, and that's where watch the videos. But you've got a bunch of different cells, and you've got guard cells, and they're sort of the first line of defense. And if that doesn't work, you've got neutrophils, and they are even better, and they'll kill the viruses. And then you've got T cells, and there's lots of them, and they help out. And there's even more to it than that. But all of these immune system cells and parts working together almost all the time are going to kill a viral infection or a bacterial infection. But one important thing to remember is with your T cells, sometimes after the T cells come out and kill the virus, they leave behind these memory T cells, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. And then antibodies are things that some of these cells make. And there you see this is your immune system is shooting an antibody at a virus. And antibodies are little, and they can make your body makes tons of them. And when you get enough antibodies, they just kind of overwhelm the virus at the end. So what about vaccines? what you do with a vaccine is you're kind of faking out your immune system because you're not putting a real virus in, you're putting a dead virus or a non-functioning virus, and so that is supposed to create those memory cells that we talked about in the last slide. And if you have memory cells, then you have what's called immunity. And so here are some illustrations. This is a person who had polio, a person who had smallpox, and I think this is rubella. Yeah, measles, mumps, rubella. And here's the the vaccine medication. So here's some statistics. Measles before 1963, typically the United States got 4 million cases a year, 48,000 hospitalizations, and 500 deaths. That's kind of a lot. If you look up measles, not a lot of people survived it, but a lot of people got sick, and it was something that was an annual problem before you had a measles vaccine. Smallpox. We think about this more as a history lesson than a science lesson because people don't really think about smallpox anymore. But 300 million people died just in the 20th century. That's not that long ago. And 1/3 of the people who would get it died. So that's really, really bad for an illness. For 1/3 of the people who get it to die, that means it's very, very serious. And over here we see even if you didn't die, it left you with could leave you with scars for life. Polio in 1952, also not that long ago. 57,000 people infected. I mean, okay, that's less than the flu would get every year, but 21,000, about a third of them would be paralyzed. Still a very, very serious thing. And now we just don't consider polio a threat in general, although it has made a comeback with some folks not getting the vaccines. So that's how vaccines work. Basically, they give your immune system a head start by having these memory cells in your body ahead of time so that if you actually ran into, let's say, smallpox and you had a smallpox virus in your body, your immune system would react so fast you would never even know that you were sick. Finally, here are some videos to take a look at. How viruses work from NPR. How viruses work from a provider called Sciencey Stuff. How the immune system fights infections from the Australian Academy of Science, and why vaccines work from It's Okay to Be Smart. Try to check out all those videos, and I think that you will find that it will explain it pretty well, and you'll have a good understanding of how viruses actually work.